right, good morning, everybody. Bennett here. Glad to be with you guys. All right, our scripture again this month. I guess we're going over the Communicator series, and so we're going over the life of Joseph, and I'm gonna jump right into the scripture. So this is from Genesis chapter 40, and starts with verse 1. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials and put them into custody in the house of the captain of the guard, and in the same prison where Joseph was confined. And then it jumps down to, it keeps going. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." And then our second verse just comes from Romans 8, verse 28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So when we think about some of our favorite movies or TV shows, obviously because we're talking about a story, everybody kind of remembers usually just like the general plot of what happened. And I think when we sum up a movie, if I asked you to sum up Star Wars, you'd probably tell me what happened. But the important thing to a lot of stories that makes them more complex or interesting is the backdrop. So sometimes those details can kind of seem random, and I'm going to come back to that. But I think if you think about any good story, you have to know what the context of everything is. Context is kind of everything in a way. So today we're talking about what to do plot-wise when we go through heavy, painful, or real-life stuff. And obviously everybody right now is kind of going through painful stuff. There's still not a lot that we can do with the pandemic. There's obviously a lot of hardship that people are taking on. And obviously right now there's cases are still going up, and that can be kind of scary for us. So but I think it's funny, before we answer the question, what do I do, we often ask ourselves, why me? Why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? And we take stuff, very personally, and most of the time things that don't feel good can seem like they don't have a point in our lives. And it just feels pointless in the moment and unfair. I definitely relate to that. I mean, when my mom got diagnosed with cancer, that obviously, I still don't really see the good that's going to come out of that necessarily. The pandemic, obviously, I don't feel that there's any good that's going to come out of that. Even now, the worry that causes me, because I guess my mom's more at risk, that kind of freaks me out too. So in real life, unlike the movies, though, our difficult circumstances usually don't get a pretty bow tied when we walk into them either. And so let's get back to the story, and I'll kind of talk on what I mean by that. But again, here's a recap of the story of Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He was taken to a foreign land, Egypt, where he was forced to be a slave, and he was falsely accused of doing something he didn't do, and then was thrown into prison. And so, like I said, a lot of times when we tell stories, those hardships, hard times can kind of be romanticized. I don't know if anybody's ever read or watched The Count of Monte Cristo. It kind of follows the story of Joseph, and I love the story of The Count of Monte Cristo. I love when he's in prison. But it's hard to think about Joseph being a real guy and him really going through being sold into slavery by his family, trying to almost work his way out, and now he's thrown into prison. I mean, that's pretty brutal. That's kind of a tougher draw than I think probably any of us are going to get. So, and remember, he was in prison for a crime he didn't even commit. So, but the story tells us Joseph was obviously very forgotten, but the story tells us the cupbearer also forgot about Joseph. He got out of jail and went on to... Oh, and I skipped my notes, so I'm sorry. Hopefully they'll edit that out. But anyway, so Joseph's in bad circumstances, and I think we should be able to relate to that. And he's probably similarly thinking, why me, God? Why is this happening to me? So then these two guys, the baker and the cupbearer, ask him to interpret their dreams. And we didn't read the whole thing, but they go on to tell Joseph their dreams, and with God's help, Joseph told them what they meant. And then what Joseph said would happen did happen. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people have obviously forgotten about Joseph. This is what I meant. The cupbearer also forgot about him. He actually got out of jail and went on with his own life. And Joseph had asked him to remember him as a friend, and if he, ever got out of prison and stuff worked out for him, which Joseph predicted would happen, to get him out of that situation. But his friend didn't help him. So then his situation was even lower, obviously. But actually, 2 years later, Pharaoh had dreams that troubled him, and nobody could interpret them. And so that's when the cupbearer did remember Joseph. And Joseph ended up getting called by Pharaoh to interpret his dream. And as a result, Joseph interpreted it correctly and was eventually made kind of Pharaoh's right-hand man. So under his leadership as well, I should add, Joseph ended up being a great leader. He was able to stay in that position of power. Egypt survived a pretty big famine. And in fact, that ended up, Joseph ended up, it's a long story, but he ended up being reunited with his family, and they forgave each other kind of as a result of that famine. So I guess, to tie everything up, and I don't want to go too long, but if I could sum everything up, I'd say that, you look at a story like Joseph, and hard things are happening to all of us right now, and they'll definitely continue to happen in your life. And it's hard to remember when you're down in the dumps like Joseph is in prison, that anybody's looking out for you. But God has, nonetheless, when we look back at stuff, 10 years back, even 5 years or 3 years or even 1 year back, a lot of times we can see that in those hard times, stuff ended up working out and maybe even being better, or maybe we learned a valuable lesson because of those. So, and I think it's also important to remember that when you don't know what to do, sometimes your problems can also position you for a purpose. So a lot of, again, that's what's tough now, is not only is everything hard with the pandemic, but we can't, we also, we don't know what to do. This is kind of an unforeseen challenge. So it doesn't mean that we can tie a bow on the challenges and the hard stuff in life. It doesn't mean we should just take them rosily and be happy about it. I think it's still fair to be sad and frustrated in times like this, but we can still have faith in God, and we should. And if we leave room for God to tell a new story in our hard circumstances, then he probably will, and it'll end up probably being a really cool story. So remember, that Joseph went through pain that felt pointless, but when we look back at history, we see God use his problems and ended up positioning him to do great things because of it. And so, hopefully, same thing happens, I guess, with everything that's going on right now in your life. And, whether it's the pandemic or maybe something that's personally challenging for you, I definitely hope that's the case. So anyway, that's about 10 minutes, so I'll go ahead and get off. of it. But thanks for listening to me. I hope I wasn't the worst, but I appreciate it, and hopefully get to see all you guys soon in person. So thanks, and have a great Sunday.